Okay.
All right. Thank you for your patience here. I was munching on some nuts because it's lunchtime.
Oh,
For you. It's lunchtime for you.
For me, it is lunchtime for me, and I just came back from vacation, so to speak. So I'm a bit off my my clock. So it's even a little bit later for me, my biological clock. So look at that, Adam and Val. Hi guys, are you guys out there? Well,
maybe not.
On, but their camera is not on, but maybe they're dialing in, or maybe we get to hear them soon.
Good afternoon, good evening.
Hello.
good afternoon.
Good evening to you guys out there. I think it's about 8 o'clock for your time.
It is indeed, yes. It's all nice and dark, nice and cold.
Since 4 o'clock.
And Sylvia, where are you in the world?
Puyallup, Washington.
Oh, fantastic. Look at that.
Washington
so we've got
State.
Washington State. Oh,
Yeah.
Great. So you're my people. You're here in Western time.
Yes, I'm in the Western.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much for being here, Sylvia, and everybody else.
Thank
I know
you.
that it's kind of hard as well because people have different schedules, but we really appreciate you being here. I also want to apologize. I was out on vacation. I thought I had sent out a reminder email.
You did.
It did not go out until just now.
I thought it did.
Yeah, but excited to be here with you guys. And before we start, I just want to share with you as well that we're excited. We've been talking to a friend of ours, which some of you may know, Joe Musi. He's out there in Dubai with Sandra, and they've agreed to help out as well. And we're going to try to offer a different time slot too for these live sessions. So we're going to have like 2 time sessions, and hopefully it will take place on Saturday. And that will take place Saturday Dubai time at around 1 p.m., which makes it interesting for folks who may not be in Europe or even Europe but want to do a weekend piece, and folks who might be elsewhere in general. So stay tuned. We're gonna add those pieces in there and see how it goes. It's about midnight right now from them, so it's kind of hard for them to make their way in here. So it'll be interesting to see if we can offer different options for different folks.
Nice.
Yeah, great. And look at that. We can see you guys out there in the UK. I love it. So it's lovely to see you. And we don't know how many people are going to join us today, again, because of my late notice and a reminder. But I'm really glad that you're here. At the end of the day, it's not about numbers, it's about quality. And Luciani has also shared with us that she's going to potentially have to jump off a little earlier because she's taking her husband to the airport, which is something I can appreciate very much. Thank you for doing that. All right, so this will be part 2, module 2 of our experiment, our online experiment. Today, the goal here would be to talk about the scientific aspect of Spiritism. And just as a context before we begin, we back up a little bit. Remember, we're in our Spiritism 101 course, and the idea here is to provide an introduction to Spiritism in general. I know that for a lot of us, this might be things that we already know, but it's always great to talk to more people about it and see if we can develop different perspectives about it. So I'm glad that you're here. Last time we met, about 2 weeks ago online, we talked about the introduction piece in general, about a primer in Spiritism. I recorded that session too if you want to watch it. And this time around, what we were hoping that we could do was to talk about about Spiritism as a journey of discovery, which I think is pretty peculiar, in particular to Spiritism, the way that it came about. And to help us along that journey, we posted there a long read, probably the longest read we'll do in this course, which is a brief history of Spiritism. which is the first part of the booklet called Spiritism Easy Explained, sometimes called Spiritism in its Simplest Expression, depends on what translation you're reading. But that whole piece, you know, talks a little bit about the history of Spiritism and how it came about. And so hopefully we'll talk a little bit about that. I'll talk about the scientific aspect of things and then dive into questions. Does that sound like a plan?
Yes.
Great. And if that's okay with you guys, we would love to take our, I know, a minute or so, first of all, to just kickstart us with a prayer. Would that be okay?
Of course.
All right. Does anyone want to take a stab at it, or should I do it? I'll do it. How about that? Because, you know, every time we do that, people tend to get self-conscious. So I will start a little bit. You're welcome to follow along, you know, with your eyes closed, open, whatever works for you. There is really no rule here. Just make sure that you feel connected and that are part of it. Before you do that too, I want to make sure I'm turning my notifications on my computer off because people have been calling. All right. So I'll take a quick moment to close my eyes and ask God and the good spirits to be with us as we try to spend another hour together learning, no matter where we may find ourselves in the world today. We ask for peace of mind and the ability to set aside our daily trials and tribulations and focus on what we're saying and what we're trying to learn, which ultimately is to remind us that we are spiritual beings first. So I'm grateful for the help and assistance of our spiritual mentors and guides who are always with us. We thank God and we begin. All right, Module 2, Part 2, Spiritism as a Journey of Discovery. I just wanted to, before we jump in, I just wanted to, I think I've done this, but I might want to do this again really quickly, if that's okay with you. You know, in framing about, like, what are the basic things that we want to talk to people about when it comes to Spiritism? Sometimes it's kind of hard because Spiritism is so vast and so encompassing and so broad in so many different ways oh, I think Sylvia, I think you're Sylvia. I've definitely sharing the screen there. That's okay. We're back.
Sorry.
Not a problem at all. It happens. So Spiritism can be so so broad and so encompassing. It's kind of hard to start. So we started with a definition of Spiritism. And in my mind, at least in my mind, it makes sense to go back a little bit to the history of Spiritism because I think I think it's unique. In the field of spirituality and spiritual thinking, I am not very familiar with any other approach that has started with a scientific aspect, that has started with a journey of discovery. And I think that's what Spiritism really started as. And I think that sometimes we forget that. We come about 160 years later, we read these wonderful books that have wonderful you know, information, great knowledge, and sometimes we lose sight of how they came about and why that information is so vital and so interesting. And why is it that we trust that information so much? Because if we just pick a book up from a shelf, you just read an author and who's this Allan Kardec guy? Why should I pay any attention to what he's saying? But when we look at the history of Spiritism, we see that the products of the books are not the products of Allan Kardec. He's simply the editor. He just put things together. That the books are in fact the result of many different intelligences, many different people chiming in different ways. And what Kardec has done was to triangulate all the knowledge, right? But all started from the effects of the history there. So the intent of the session today was to kind of expose that a little bit and give us an opportunity to talk about it. So are there any things that you guys found interesting from the reading or anything that you might want to bring up and talk about?
Can we talk about the how important it is to talk about Spiritism in the English language? I was just listening about that with Vanessa and Saloni. how important it is for us, like if we're going to start the gospel at home, to do it in English?
Yes, yes, of course. You know, this course here is actually a validation of that, and the importance of communicating to people in different languages. And of course, English is a language that's, you know, used widely, but also because there are sometimes so many books and so many materials already in Spanish and in Portuguese, and you know, we don't have as many in English yet, although we're working towards it. And it's important to do things in English because many of us don't speak other languages, so that's nice. You know, but it's an individual journey. You know, of course we understand that some people may have different preferences, and if they speak different languages, they might have different choices. It just happens that in this course we do things in English because that's what we do. That's the language we speak, right?
And Daniel, adding a little bit to what Sylvia said, I think based on this historical background, what kind of always for me is interesting to think is that in 1848, it starts in the West, the phenomena with the two sisters and all that. So it was something that happened here and then Europe and all that, but we don't see Spiritism being so spread out here than it is in Brazil, let's say. Here we feel like we are crawling to the idea that Spiritism can become well known in the West, and history says that this was one of the starting points.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, right? So I think that we all pick up maybe from the reading or from our previous encounters with the idea of spiritual communication, because the reading really does talk about the turning tables and the spiritual phenomena that were taking place in the middle of the 19th century. So we're talking about 1840s, 50s, 60s, and thereabouts, right? And we all know that a lot of it, you know, started a little bit here in the United States, in upstate New York with the Fox sisters. And of course, it's happened everywhere else in the world. So it's been happening forever, but it kind of happened in a more concerted effort, a more focused effort. And people are oftentimes wondering, why is it then that it didn't take hold here? Why did it take place? Why did it take hold in Paris? And then after that, why did it really go to Brazil, right? These are interesting questions in general. But I think that the key piece to it all that Kardec does a great job of pointing out in his reading is a lot of people were really interested in the phenomena, and they found that entertaining. And you know, they believed it, they didn't believe it, they found it entertaining. But few people really took the time to try to think about what are the implications behind the phenomena, right? Because sometimes they joke around and say, hey, we didn't have Netflix back in the day, right? We didn't have TVs. And so a lot of times folks just went to the salons and just seeing these things as novelties, as entertainment. But not a lot of people really put their time, effort, and sometimes even their own credibility on the line to investigate this further. And I think that's what the distinction that we can make about Kardec and the reason why Spiritism came about in Paris and not in the United States. Unfortunately, it seems that at that time in the United States, nobody was willing to pursue it further than just the phenomena itself. You know, Kardec talks to us in other places through the codification or the compilation, the Spiritist compilation, that is, that there are different levels of understanding or different levels of Spiritism or Spiritists, I should say. And one of them is those who are interested in the phenomena. And then the second and third piece becomes really like, okay, now that you have accepted that perhaps the spiritual reality is a thing, is real, then what does that mean for you, for your life, right? So what does it mean for me? Well, if I'm a spirit, maybe I ought to start thinking about how I behave and how to treat others, because I now know that I live eternally and that I might come back and also have to deal with the consequences of my treating of Sergio poorly or whatever it is, right? Because things don't end up. So that shift, I think, in my perspective, it's important for you to know that this is my perspective only, right? that was what the key piece. We were missing somebody who was able to say, hold on a second, these phenomena are rather intriguing, but there are great moral implications or ethical implications, I should say here, to the idea that we now have proved that life goes on beyond the physical body. And I think that's the reason why we have the birth of Spiritism in Paris, which was also at that time, you have to remember this, right? Paris was also the center of the world at that point in time. It was an era of rebirth, intellectually speaking, right? We had gone through historically, from a humanistic perspective, some dark ages in the Middle Ages where knowledge was suppressed, and then we had the rebirth of that in the 18th century with enlightenment and everything else. Everything else was booming, right? Science had progressed to a point that scientific method was around that time. We were able to produce more things and develop new life in cities. People had more time of the day to investigate and research other things. Life in general was getting better. The arts were booming. Literature was doing great. So there was a great period of intellectual renewal. And personally, I think that that's the reason why Spiritism came at that point in time. Why is it that the spirits were rocking the table, so to speak, at that point in time? Because then, at that point in our history, we had the scientific and the intellectual capacity to take that study further, not do what has seemingly been done throughout the rest of history, which is have some people understand it, and then they only pass it along to those who are like their students or who have been initiating their knowledge. Because as you remember on the reading, Kardec talks to us about how this knowledge, these pieces of information that we gather have always been there. The difference now is that we were able to get more details, right, about these. So to kind of sum it up and not monopolize the conversation here, I think that Spiritism is no doubt a body of knowledge who's ahead of its time because it really keeps on giving, but it's not before its time. I don't think that I don't think they would have lived had it come 100 years earlier. We wouldn't have scientific frame of mind to understand the triangulation that Kardec did. We wouldn't be able to understand the scientific perspective of there's many different mediums communicating many different things. And so that they really talk to each other. Right? I think that our human psyche was ready at that point in time. And it makes sense to Paris, the leading brain of the world at that point in time, to also be the place that received it, that hosted it. But now, after that, we can also ask the question, why is it that France did not boom with Spiritism afterwards, right? And it's a great question to ask. I think it's a very valid one too. I think that we also find that across the channel in England, spiritualism also was, taking hold, and things were happening everywhere. And so why is it that Spiritism didn't take hold there? Well, we have to remember that, there was a great set of wars that came right after the 1800s, right? So early in the 20th century, we had the First World War, we have the Second World War, which were really brutal for Europe in general. And you might recall that during that time, the philosophies that kind of sprung about, they were very negative. They were the nihilistic movement. They were the existentialistic movement. People were really doubtful of where things were because they saw so much destruction, right? And the whole of Europe, which did not happen in the New World, so to say. So I think it's an interesting perspective that the mental shift might not have helped, right? Although I think that spiritual knowledge might have helped people become more positive around this time. But one thing that I did notice, or I seem to notice, and I want to put it back to you guys, both in the US and the UK, is the spiritualist movement, and we talked a little bit about spiritualism and spiritism, right, in the first part. The spiritualist movement has always existed and somewhat thrived, either in the United States or in the UK. The difference to me, it seems, is that the spiritualist movement has focused more on the proof of the phenomena than of the consequences of the phenomena themselves, right? So I think we still see today mediums and a bunch of wonderful people doing great work of reminding us that there is validation for the phenomena, that you can go and have a reading, whatever it is, and people on TV and everything else, they're trying to show us that the phenomena is real, that life goes on. I think that in Spiritism, we have already satisfied ourselves with that. And now we're more about the ethical implications of that. So it's kind of a different approach. And I think that one of the challenges of the spiritualist movement in general, too, is that people hold wildly different beliefs and different sets of ideas. And they haven't always wanted to come together and triangulate that, as Kardec did in the beginning, right? Sometimes folks are more interested in holding their own view rather than just saying, oh, let me see whether somebody else is saying and whether this talks to each other, right? So it's a tough thing, right? And why is it that Spiritism is not more widespread in the United States, well, or in the rest of the English-speaking world? Who knows? There's, I think, so many different factors. But I think one factor is, and this is something that perhaps we did not experience in Brazil as much, is there are so many competing ways of thinking about spirituality in the English-speaking world that it's not always present in Brazil, for instance, right? The Brazilian culture being steeped in mainly the Catholic faith and some African influences, of course, with some other things, has never been as receiving, or has never been exposed, I should say, to so many different ways of thinking as the English-speaking world has, for instance. I think that we are going to find a variety of spiritual approaches and thinking trying to make their way into the English-speaking world for whatever reasons, and it kind of generates, so to say, I don't want to use the word competition, but there's so many different pieces of information coming at you that makes it hard for people to pay attention. It might be a cultural thing, and this is all guesses, right? But I think at the end of the day, it's kind of hard for it to go ahead if you don't, apologies, if we are not studying and trying to understand what Spiritism really is, because there's so much misinformation about what it is, people don't even give it the time of day, right? But you know what? I'm going to pause there really quickly and actually maybe toss it to you guys out there in the UK. What do you guys think? Do you guys have a different perspective? Do you care to weigh in on this one?
Yeah, I think one of the difficulties is that it's not easy to be a spiritist, is it? We have to work on our difficulties, our imperfections. So I think this is the main aspect that I can see that's so difficult, because there are many other spiritualist practices and beliefs that they don't focus too much on the self-improvement, and they have more like fancy ways of practicing. So I think the inner transformation is something that is not very easy, and sometimes people are not ready for this, you know.
And I think from a from a historical perspective, you're absolutely right, Dan, when you said about the 1800s were a time of discovery of science, electricity. I don't know about many of you, but when I was at school, I was taught electricity was only invented in the 1900s. That's not true. Electricity was discovered hundreds of years ago. The battery was created over 150 years ago. The internal combustion engine was first produced by Mercedes in the 1880s. H.G. Wells created a lot of his things because of the technology that was going on at the time. And so, yeah, Spiritism, I think, did come about because people were thinking more about the science of everything. Forensic science was being used by the police. The stories of Sleepy Hollow were created around that idea. People were trying to adapt more philosophies. So I think that's one good reason for Kardec obviously thinking, well, hang on, France, the hotbed of education, hotbed of thinking during that time. Science was a big thing, so let's go ahead with that. But why it's not taken off so much here? Well, yes, from what we can see nowadays, Spiritism is very small in most countries, apart from Brazil. One good reason as to why, a theory as to why it easily went to Brazil was because of the trade routes. We know that, Dr. Bezerra received various translations from people who were going back and forth between Europe and Brazil. Because they were picking up this philosophy and saying, look, here, read this book, read this book. So we know that that's something from a cultural perspective. Brazil, the New World, lots of people migrated there from, because of, and just after the Inquisition period. And so people were probably looking for new religions. And even nowadays in Brazil, if you look at how people are now, people are accepting more, for example, the Hindu faith, Sikhism, Islam. We've got this growing in Brazil because people there, I think, are a bit more open. But here in Europe, definitely, if it's not a defined religion, people are just going to think, oh, it's just a philosophy. Because we've had people from Asia, from China, Japan, living in the UK for over 2,000 years. Mm-hmm. We had the Romans here 2,000 years ago. We had the Greeks here over 2,000 years ago. We had Indians here 2,000 years ago. So we've had all these philosophies here for such a long time that it's more like a bit more second nature to accept things, but not to be too worried if it's not your religion.
Yeah. Yep. And that's a great point, because at the end of the day, it's really not important to us how many spirits are there in the world, right? Because if there are other spiritists or not, it does not change who we are. And if we're talking about the fact that Spiritism, the goal of Spiritism is to create better people and not better spiritists, right? It doesn't really matter how many spiritists are there in the world. What matters is what is it that we are doing with the teachings that we have to become better people, right? And this is one of the things I think that's so interesting. Spiritism, we're not worried about a hierarchy. We don't have official priests, priestesses, and owners of things and managers and whatever it is. That sometimes is very confusing for people because they want to have an authority on something, but there isn't a clear authority. But that's on purpose, so that we learn how to triangulate the information on our own, by ourselves, right? Which was exactly what Kardec was doing. He was navigating the world around him and the experiences around him on his own, talking to people. And then he compiles it all in a format that lends itself to us being able to see where he got that information from, right? If you take the first book, Spirit's book, which everything else springs out of the Spirit's book, in my opinion, right? You see that there are very few essays he writes from his own understanding of things. And when there is, he's just unfolding the pieces of information that he has gathered before. He goes along, he puts a lot of effort to try to give us the facts that he gathered, like the actual questions with like verbatim answers in it, and so that we can make up our own minds. And I think that's revolutionary in that sense, because oftentimes people want to get that piece of information, to digest that piece of information. And they don't want to give us a digested piece and say, here it is, it's for you. But Kardec went to great lengths to say, here's what I gathered and what I saw, and here's the journey that I underwent, so that you can decide whether this makes sense to you, right? And I think it's fantastic. I think it's brilliant. But it's hard, right? Like Val was saying, it's hard because it's a journey of self-discovery, which, let's be honest, all religious sects, thinkings, ideas also want to do, right? But sometimes maybe we can get lost in the hierarchy of things and think that we are going through the motions and making progress. And the Spiritism is a little bit harder to do that because there is no path. There is no, hey, you're going to do this and then you're going to be level 2 Spiritist. Oh my goodness. Somebody's level 3 Spiritist, right? There is no such thing, right? Even our arguments of, oh, I've been Spiritist for 25 years or I am a 3rd generation Spiritist make no sense in my head. Because it's not about the amount of time that you have studied something that tells you the quality of what you have learned, right? And it's not what my grandparents or my grandparents' grandparents have learned that makes me a better person, right? It's whether I, by the actions and the things that I'm doing, what I'm studying, putting into practice, if I can make sense of life and make a difference. So it's really hard. And that's why also I sometimes don't worry too much about how many people are there spiritists. Do we have more spiritists here, there? I think it's interesting to know, and I think it's great to find a community of people, right? And it's part of the reason why we're doing this, because there isn't a large, globally speaking, there isn't a large English-speaking spiritist community, right? We can kind of swap ideas with, but that doesn't mean that we don't keep studying. It doesn't mean that we don't put ourselves together via online or whatever it is and do these things, right? But this, what I think is fascinating about from this is that this journey of discovery, this DNA of inquiry, is like at the core of Spiritism. We cannot have Spiritism without questions. We cannot have Spiritism without disagreeing on things and trying to make a sense of the world. And I think that's what Kardec did so brilliantly, was he set in motion the beginning of it all, right? And he shows us how to go about getting that own information ourselves via the Medium's book, which is part 2, right? Say, hey, I got all this wonderful information in the Spirits book. And by the way, here's another book that I wrote or put together so that you can understand how I got that first information in the first place. So from a didactic perspective, Kardec is a great educator saying, here's what you can make sense of the world. Hey, you take it, you make your own ideas. And by the way, here's how I acquire that information, right? And that's why sometimes the Medium's book is a book that is not really widely read, because people don't have a lot of patience for the method, right? They want to pre-choose stuff and say, here's the answer to your problems. So that's kind of really hard, right? Anything else on there that you found interesting or that jumped at you?
You're talking about hi, Dan.
Hi, Maria.
Hi. When you talk the first question about why the people is not become a spiritist, my opinion, one of the reasons, for many reasons, is because since the time of the Jesus or before, the people has some deep struggles to accept new ideas, and then it's accommodating in the religion or the philosophy that it used to practice or believe. Then I think the accepting new ideas is in any situations is really hard for people. It's my opinion.
Oh, you nailed it, right? Everybody wants a different world, right? Everybody wants change, but nobody wants to change.
Right.
Hey, the problem with the world is all you people, right? If all of you people behave better, the world will be great, according to me, right? But nobody's willing to say, oh yeah, the world needs to be better. I need to change some of my habits too. And I think that's the age-old question. What is it that we are willing to do, right, to change ourselves? And it's a journey of transformation. It really is, right? There is no other way. And it doesn't have to be only spiritists for you to say that, right? So it's not just spiritists who are doing this. Everybody's doing this or trying to do this a certain way. Change is really hard, especially when we consider the idea that we're not just a being to have lived X number of years in this lifetime, but that we may have vices and habits that come with us from previous lives that we have used many, many times, right? That's why I think the parable of the prodigal son is so beautiful in so many different ways. That's time for a different conversation at one point in time. But Sergio, I think that you wanted to say something.
Yes, thank you, Dan. I think perhaps the most basic way that I can relate to this, perhaps if you identify this as an issue, why we are not as, I guess, as well dispersed throughout the world and have many adepts as perhaps Kardec sometimes think that it would be the case in the doctrine, is because most religions, if not all of them, perhaps with the exception of the Spiritist doctrine, identify your leader as a savior. Identifying someone as a savior presupposes that you're a victim and the savior will put in all the work to rescue you. And I, on the other hand, tend to believe in the saying of help yourself and heaven will do its part. So we have to meet halfway until we become aware that we are part of the solution and we need to change ourselves. We are not going to make the progress that is required of us. So that's the issue to me. And it seems to be that misunderstanding is present since Jesus' time, when they thought that he was bringing the kingdom of heaven to earth. Whereas I believe that he came to teach and show how we can behave morally and intellectually so we can qualify to become citizens of the kingdom of God and not the other way around. So we shouldn't try to bring the kingdom of heaven down to earth, but we should try to elevate ourselves to become worthy of being in the kingdom of heaven.
Yeah, and I think that goes. Yeah, I think it goes back to what we're saying, right? Because when we do one, the other one comes. So it's got to be, right? This got to be a journey of self-discovery and self-change, which brings us to a very different aspect that sometimes we struggle with. Is subconsciously, I wonder sometimes if we all think that we all have to be the same, right? And we feel like unless we think exactly like the other person thinks, then one of us is wrong, right? And we worry about that. But no, I mean, we're all on a personal journey of discovery here. There might be things that we don't agree with, but we can't let that bring us apart, right? So maybe, like clearly everybody loves ice cream, because if you don't love ice cream, you're crazy, right? That's just my perspective of the world. But it doesn't mean that you have to have the same flavors, right? So maybe I like chocolate ice cream. Maybe Sylvia likes strawberry ice cream. We don't need to fight over which flavor is better. We have, enough to focus on. We know that we like ice cream, right? So having this ability to understand and accept different people's perspective and be willing to change yourself is the key to it all. Yeah, I really think so. And I think that's actually what what all these messages have come to lead us to. But, Sergio, you brought in a very interesting piece that we haven't talked about, and it's more of a third module thing when we talk about the philosophy piece. But one interesting thing about Spiritism is that through this journey of discovery and scientific prodding and probing, the spirits that were communicating with Kardec at the time led us back to the Christ, to the idea of Christianity, but led us back to it in a way that it kind of makes us rethink what we had previously made it to be, right? And so it's an interesting piece when we start to realize that we have the ability to remake the world depending on how we look at it, right? So when we are able to understand the origins of Spiritism that came through like discovery and searching, maybe we become less resistant to the idea of religion in general, right? Because sometimes we feel like we've been imposed a Christ, a religion, a label, whatever it is. And because of the interactions that we've had with people with those labels, we are not so happy to be associated with them. Does that make sense? Is it too abstract? I, for one, grew up with a little bit of like, I don't know if I want all this Bible stuff around, my head here. All these old name people with weird names in different places. And I don't know how that really relates to me. But through search and inquiry, right, and being able to kind of set aside my own preconceived notions that I had because I was exposed to people who were perhaps very set on their own ways about how things ought to be, I started to reevaluate a whole body of knowledge, a whole content, a whole philosophy of life, because I was able to take that label away from it. And I think that sometimes happens with religion, right? And sometimes people confuse organized religion with religion being your individual piece and organized religion being the human part of it. So I think this act of going back to the searching and sciencey part that Kardec did, meandering through the ages to kind of get to those things, gives us, those of us who are not satisfied with the current way that religion and God and spirituality were explained to us before, a new way of arriving at the same place. All that to say is that, you know, all roads lead to Rome. We just take different paths, and it's okay for us to think differently. At the end of the day, we're not as concerned with what other people do. We're more concerned with what we do, right? What did you guys thought was interesting of the whole piece? Anything that jumped at you of the text? Any parts that you disagreed with or you wanted to talk more about?
Can I say something? One thing I gather from all the conversations just now, like I told you the last time, I've been a spiritist for over 60 years, but I also had a chance to experience different churches and talk to different other communities about religion. And the one thing I gathered, no matter what religion, no matter what, is just that we need to change ourselves, like you said before, become a better person, help the one next that needs help. Be a positive person. Even when you're sick, stay positive. Be positive with yourself so you can heal faster. Be positive with others, you know, be patient. Our big keys is just, no matter what religion they're in, I think that's the main purpose in life. And that's what I gather with the spirit, being a spiritist. I have learned that no matter what your label is, you need to just be a good human being, not just to yourself, to your family, also to anyone that comes into your path. That was it.
Yeah, sounds great. Yeah, can't disagree with that, Sylvia. What do you guys think? Do we toss Sylvia under the bus and say, Sylvia, you can no longer join us because of all that good nonsense that you spoke of? You know, and that's and I think you're right too. You know, and that's what I think is so hard. We're so trapped sometimes in little boxes that it's hard for us to see that it's all about the day, right? And I think that's if I go back to the scientific piece of Kardec, this is what I think is really cool, right? The Spirit's book has 4 parts, right? The primary causes, which is really the basic facts, spiritual world, the moral laws, and then causes and consequences, hopes and sorrows, right? That same method, I feel, can be extrapolated on or can be used for our own lives. So whenever we want to learn about something or we are having a tough time making a way through life or making tough decisions, we can ask ourselves and follow that path and say, what are the facts that I have, right? Because sometimes we make decisions without having the facts. We just make stories in our head, but we don't go back to actually having the facts. Then I sometimes ask myself, okay, now that I have the facts, what is it that I can surmise from those facts? What comes of it, right? And the other ones, oh yeah, now that I kind of have an idea, the story finally that was really based on the facts, how should I behave, right? What does my ethical compass tell me about how I should act? And then just think about this. Before I act, let me think about what will happen if I act one way or if I act a different way, right? So we have the whole 4 parts of the Spirit's book suggesting to us a way of facing life from a scientific perspective that may help us gather our thoughts and be better prepared to make choices and changes in our lives, which is really hard, right? And you know what? The truth is, I think that we learned from the teachings of the Christ is that journey is an individual one, right? We can be with a lot of people around us, but ultimately we're the ones who live our own lives, and we're going to have to make tough decisions that sometimes are not going to be so great. You know, I was just talking the other day in Chicago about a topic that I love a lot, which is the road to Damascus from Paul, and I find that so symbolic, right? We all go through our journey of discovery, our road to Damascus, you know, but we do it alone. Right? There might be people around us, but, you know, when we start to open ourselves out to spirituality, sometimes they don't come along with us. And that's okay. Doesn't mean make them worse people. Doesn't make us better people. It's just that's what's speaking to us right there. And we got to do it alone because, you know, yes, being in a group is great, but ultimately you are the one who changes your own life, right? And so this idea of us being able to gather knowledge by ourselves and grow by ourselves, It's kind of like a for granted thing nowadays, right? But centuries ago, you're not really supposed to do that. You're not supposed to investigate and think about spirituality by yourself, right? And so we are trying to break that mold with ourselves. We're not trying to impose it to anybody else. If people want to do things differently, great. But for you, what is it that you want for your life? Right? Ultimately, is the question. So what else? What else? What else you guys want to bring up? We have about 20 minutes or so.
I think one important, interesting aspect that I was discussing with a friend the other day is Kardec did not, let's say, try to, even though he wrote the Spiritism in its simplest expression, he did not dumb it down, let's put it this way. He was a renowned educator, a researcher, and in the way he wrote all the 5 books, it kind of, there's a prerequisite that the reader must have a certain level of education and perhaps a little bit of like that logical or scientific or philosopher background that you can sequentially maintain, how to say, the comprehension of how all this knowledge that was kind of really poured onto us can be, how to say, sequenced and understood. So one thing that I perhaps I find a little bit of resistance in some people to educate themselves, to bring themselves to the level of Kardec. And many people, perhaps especially in Brazil, tend to put off reading or studying Kardec because they think is above them, and they concentrate on perhaps easier, works like André Luiz or novels that are easier to consume, let's put it this way. But one thing that I'd like to say I find interesting is if you really want to understand and to apply the doctrine in its full context, you have to elevate yourself to the point that you are an active participant. You are studying. You read the doctrine like from first book to the last one, and by the time you end, you completed your reading, you start over again, and then you study this time, and then highlight it, and make connections between the books, and then at the end, you're gonna read it again one more time. It just, to me, it's part of the process of like you have to become aware that you have to make yourself better. You have to put in the time. You have to put in the efforts.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say that I think that's true of most religions, if not all religions. You'll have 2 sets of people, the passive and the active. The active are those who want to study because they know it's worthwhile studying, who want to participate because they know it's worthwhile to participate. But you have the passive, those who want to just, they read or they study because they feel obliged to do so. No, in the Catholic Church, those who go to church on a Sunday and have communion, and for them that's it. The people who go to the Sikh temples because they give out the free communal food at the start and end of the service because they know that they'll receive something. Those who go to other places because they know they'll receive something. They don't have to invest any time in their betterment. They're going to have someone just do things for them.
It's almost a lazy way of thinking. You have to push yourself and have your own mind.
Yeah, that is nice. I think you're right. I think we just have to be careful, not that we're doing it now, but to make sure that we end up not discriminating, right? Because at the end of the day, it's okay for people to do that if that's what they want to do. I guess it's better for them to do it, not doing it at all, right? It's better that they're passively close to spirituality than having zero spirituality, right? So I think if I were to draw like the life cycle of spiritually awakening, I would say like completely materialistic or oblivious, and then halfway like partially interested, and no active, right? But yeah, I think that's the challenge, right? We all want to ideally be in the level where we're active, very active, but even ourselves have days like I would consider myself reasonably active, and there are some days that I just don't want to do it, right? I just want to sit down and I'm just going to listen to somebody, right? I don't want to think about the gospel or this parable or whatever it is. I'm just going to listen and let somebody chew this one up for me, right? But that's right. And this is what makes it so hard. We've got to put our skin in the game. We've got to put our time in, right? What's somebody going to chime in?
I will. I think what you said is right, and also what Sylvia said, that even in the Spiritist world, there's so many people that say themselves being Spiritists, but they go to a center, they listen to the lecture, and that's it. They think they don't do the homework. They don't read. I hope they try to better themselves just by the lectures, just by the community that they find when they go to a spirit center. But still, a lot of people actually is one of the things that we have a conflict with the Americans that come to our center. Now we have just one, but we used to have a few more. And they always complain that the Brazilians don't read. They don't study, they just come to the center and so it's right at home. We do all the time that. But going back a little bit to basing what everyone said and going back a little bit on the journal of Spiritism, I still see that for many, they see the Spiritism as being the connection with the spirit, is the mediumship, like the encounter with the spiritual world. But they don't really understand what Spiritism really is. That is the inner transformation. They study the following the moral laws and all that. And I think sometimes we see a little conflict among the Spiritists because they feel a little intimidated to talk about Spiritism. I remember when I started, a few of the people that were running the centers, they would tell the stories, yeah, but I have this friend and he's evangelical. So I just say I go to a Brazilian church. And for me, that was, why? They cannot really say what it is and what we do and all the work we put to kind of really evolve and also help others. So still among ourselves, I feel like there is some kind of, I don't know if it's uncomfortable presence among others, because we are not a religion, we are a philosophy, but we are a religion. Do you feel the same? I live in the air.
Yeah, I see a lot of nods. I see a lot of nods in the screen, right? I've seen a little bit of that too. I think that, my opinion and my perspective on this too is, I think that the best way to talk about Spiritism is to act. And by that, I mean, just be the example. I think that a lot of people sometimes are like, well, how do I share this with English-speaking people? And I'm like, don't make it about us or them thing. It's about who you are as a person. Because I think that everybody's got some kind of ideology, things that they want other people to kind of embrace. And I think people have been somewhat reluctant to because they just keep getting sold on different things, right? But what I think that the most impactful moments in my life where I was able to, help folks out was when I was just really helping without the label. And then people are like, you know what, I've noticed that you've changed or you're doing this. Like, how come? And then I talk about it. So I am not sure that ideas and concepts are going to reach people all the time. But I think that, a friendly presence, a friendly face, an example will most of the time, right? So, and that's why sometimes I'm not worried about how to reach people. You know what I'm saying? Like, I am just more worried about what is it that I can do to become a better person, and in the process of becoming a better person, I hope it rubs on you, right? But you're very right. It's kind of hard to do that if we don't know what we are about. And selfishly, Cristiani, it's one of the reasons why I wanted to start our course with a definition of Spiritism, because I've been in many conversations where people say, I don't know how to tell people what Spiritism is. And my thought process is, if we can't articulate what Spiritism is, we don't really know it.
It's true.
If we can't really say, here's what it is, at least like give somebody a definition. If we are like talking about it and skirting it around, people will like, why are you not telling me about this? Is this a secret thing? Is this like something I shouldn't pay attention to? Right? There's all these different vibes that kind of get across. Yes, it is super hard to talk about it because there's so many different things, right? But if we have some sort of like sentence or definition, it doesn't have to be the same for everybody. We're not about, this, then maybe helps us get there. But I do sense that sometimes it's hard to talk about something that seems so different too. Sergio, what do you want to talk about?
I think when we take an active role in trying to spread Spiritism, either through the example of conduct or to try to generate interest or creating content, we're not really, let's say, creating new knowledge, but we're just trying to find, ways that other people may become interested and aware of their responsibility to become better. Some time ago, I started a study group. And I purposely kept it very simple and try to make it in a way that people can see that it is not that hard. It does not take that much time. It does not cost anything for that matter, because instead of having to, let's say, rent a space and start let's say, a small center, I just go to a local library, reserve a study room, and go there on a certain schedule, meet up, and study just like you would any other subject. So it just required a little bit of time, a little bit of preparation, didn't require any money per se. And it's something like I try to make it approachable in a way that other people can see and say like, yeah, I guess I could do that too. Because I know that some people, regardless of what we do, they're gonna look at let's say the presenter or this figure, this celebrity, and think like, well, I don't have the money, I don't have the assistants, or I don't have the knowledge, I don't have the culture level. People try to find all type of excuses to not, emulate the behavior of that better person. I mean, in the end, it's not us. It's not. We shouldn't try to emulate this person, that person. The role model that we have in the doctrine is Jesus, and that's what we really have to achieve for, or to shoot for.
Great. Anybody else want to chime in? Donna and Jair, I see you guys on the line too. I know that you are mute, but if you want to chime in, or if you want to participate via the chat piece as well, you're welcome to do that. We'd love to have you here. Thank you for being here. And clearly, you can understand nobody here is really shy, so you can just join us at any point in time.
Hi,
we're glad to be here.
Just to say hello here. I joined a little bit late, but I'm enjoying a lot to learn what you're all saying.
Well, thanks for coming off mute and saying hello, Jair. We really appreciate it. We're glad to have you here.
Thank you.
We can't see you.
Yeah, we can't see you, but that's okay, Sylvia. Maybe he's a little shy today. Maybe next time around.
I'm having trouble with my camera here.
Oh,
It says unable to access camera. I don't know how to do that. Maybe I have to go somewhere else in the phone.
oh.
Yeah, let's see how it goes. That's right. That's right. I love that, Sylvia. Just ask for the camera. Ask them to turn the camera.
I'm a little forward sometimes. Forgive me. It's just that I
No,
want
it's totally. That's great. All right, so we're coming at the end of the hour, and I think the idea here, and this is actually what I love your feedback too, is, you know, the idea was to do this for an hour. I will make myself available for another half an hour. I don't know how you guys are feeling about it, but I feel like we should maybe start to wrap our things up today and just be mindful of people's time. If people want to linger for a little longer, that's great. You know? Yeah, Sergio?
Sorry for taking too much of you guys, time and ears. But one thing I'd like to really ask people to participate in the social forums on the site, because that way we can start discussions and sharing of ideas that may not necessarily be at the same time, especially because we have different time zones and whatnot. So if you put a topic that you want to discuss on the social forum, at a later time, someone will read it and will answer. And that's how we kind of generate more interest and open up the discussion to different perspectives.
Yeah, sounds great. I'm going to do a little plug here. Look, I'm going to show you my screen here in case you haven't been able to see that just yet. And you should be able to see my screen. Which screen are you seeing? Are you seeing the website by any chance?
Your email.
Email.
Oh,
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, chat.
Danielle,
so many
I'm just going to excuse myself because I have to go. Good to see you all.
Yeah.
Okay? And I'll check with you guys in the forums. Bye-bye.
And one last thing I just want to point out, this is where he means social forums. Right there on top, you can just click on that and do any kind of questions and things that you want. Many of you don't know this yet, or haven't used it yet, but you can also use your phone to access all these forums and all these things. There is a website. There is a app called Moodle, M-O-O-D-L-E, that you can download and you can set it up to access the website. There. So I just want to let you guys know. If you need help doing that, let us know as well. But I want to ask, and look at that, Jair, you came on camera. Thank you. We can see you. Look at that, Sylvia.
I made it.
We did a good job.
There you go.
Like good old social pressure,
Now I have a face.
There you go. There you go. Put a name to a face. Yeah. But we should close this one up, and if that's okay with you guys, we'll do it the way we always do, which is we just close up with a prayer.
Yes.
And then if you guys linger around and talk, that of course I'll be glad to do that for another couple of minutes as well. But don't feel obliged to say. I know that people's times are limited, right?
Well, I have to go to work, so yes.
Wow, look at that. Very important, Susan. Very important, right? So, does anybody want to do a closing prayer for us?
Sergio did a real nice one last time. He's not willing to do it.
Yeah. Sylvia, look at you pressuring people again.
I can certainly do it, but I'll do it much shorter this time, perhaps. But I will invite everyone to please close your eyes and just for a moment, try to forget of your current incarnation and try to place yourself in the position of a creature of God created eons ago, made with a purpose and with the capability to achieve its purpose, to become an agent of the Creator, maintaining the universe and helping the upbringing of our brothers and sisters. We thank you, Lord, for the opportunity to come here and this sharing of ideas. Try to better understand how to apply your doctrine, which in the future would just be a way of living. They will no longer be called a religion or a doctrine or philosophy or science, just the way of living. So thank you for maintaining our steadfastness, and may this project continue so we can bring this light to others who are interested in it. So be it.
Thank you. So be it.
From
Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thanks for being here. I'll linger around, but don't be shy. If you have to drop, just drop.
Okay.
A friend of mine tells me, carry your own happiness wagon. Pull your own happiness wagon.
Yeah, goodbye, you all, and God bless you all.
Goodbye, Sylvia.
Thank you. Bye-bye, Sylvia.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So if you're hanging around, what do you want to talk about?
Well,
There is one thing that called my attention in the text, in the article, is the reference to punishment. And I'd like to ask you to talk a little bit about that, if you can, Dan.
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. Do you remember exactly where that was, so we can kind of look at it together and kind of call it out?
It talks about future punishments, and I understand the idea. I know that this is how it was written, but I'd like to hear what other people think, because for me, this is one thing that we try in our group. For example, every time that we find this word, we try to like replace with another word like natural consequences. We refer to cause and effect, and we try to avoid this, to convey this idea of a God that punishes. So because we think that, like we all, I think we all share these ideas, like God is all good and just. So I'd like to hear what people think about that.
Let's punish all the infidels, right? Absolutely. So I think that that you're referring to here in the text, about 8 paragraphs from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 paragraphs from the bottom up. And God bless technology where you can just search for words on the book. It's just amazing how quickly you can get to things, right? And he says, Spiritism teaches nothing new. That is true. But it's not valuable, but it is not valuable to show in an obvious and irrefutable way the existence of the soul, its survival over body's death, its immortality, its future punishments and rewards. How many believe in such things? And goes on and so on, right? So I think that is such a great question, because this word is such a harsh one, and it's hard, in my opinion, to understand it without context, without historical context, right? So we have to understand when this conversation was taking place. It's taking place in the 1850s in a culture that's mainly Catholic, with Catholic friends, mainly, right? And the idea of punishment in general is one that we see throughout Christianity. I think that the challenge piece about that part is that people read punishment and they sometimes equate punishment to external punishment, right? Somebody else punishing us. If we were to believe that God is really punishing us in the strictest sense of the word punish, then I think that we would have a mean and rude and human God, right? Which would make God not God in my book, right? So if God is human, God is not God, right? We humans think about punishment. We humans think about these egocentric things that we have. God, in my mind, by definition, cannot be human in that aspect, right? God's got to be all caring, all knowing, all powerful. So God could not possibly punish us, and God could not possibly have human characteristics. such as being offended. So the act of offending God for me is something that I understand poetically, right? But I don't think that I can possibly offend God, because for God to be offended, he'd have to have an ego, right? I don't think God has ego, right? So I think that God understands who I am. And so when I ask for forgiveness to God, I don't think God was personally offended. I think it's more of a tool for ourselves to understand and negotiate our own passageway, right? Through things. But you're very right. The word punishment is a hard one because we equate to somebody else punishing us. And I think that what I've heard, at least, and read in my spiritist, studies in general, is that this punishment that we're talking about here is generally our own punishment, that we punish ourselves through our own consciousness. Because at the end of the day, we are the judges of our own actions. And we actually are the ones who get to punish ourselves from our deeds when we understand that they're not so great. So if we are able to shift our minds from future punishment coming from the outside world to future punishments coming from the inside world, maybe that will make us better apt to understand what we're talking about here, right? But I agree with you. The punishment word is loaded, right? So when we take into the consideration the historical piece, I think that makes it a little bit easier. When we take the time to explain to people that we should really understand what the punishment piece comes, it helps me at least to think about the punishment piece as more of a self-punishment piece than an external punishment. Because at least for me, I know that sometimes I am overly aggressive in punishing and blaming myself than I sometimes should. But it's a great point, right? And this is yet another reason why we cannot interpret everything literally, because words are insufficient. And that is why the Spirits tells us that in the beginning of the Spirits book. And that's why we ought to do that to the Bible, to Spiritism, to anything else in the world. We should not be hung up on specific words. And if we are, we should search for meaning and say, what do we really mean about punishments over here? But I agree with you. This punishment thing is a biggie, right? I want to hear from people as well, because I think there are a lot of folks who are pushed away from God because of this idea of punishment. And there are even expressions that sometimes I hear quite a bit that like break my heart a little bit. Like, I am a God-fearing person. I'm like, why would I fear God? Right? I think it's like a inheritance from previous religious thinking, from I call it the Old Testament God, right? I think that the Old Testament God is kind of hardcore, and I think that the New Testament God is a kind God, right? I think that's what Jesus did, which was really great. It transformed like a mean and vengeful God into a loving God, right? But
well, I think on that. Sorry, I think on that there's a lot of misinterpretation and mistranslation from the Old Testament. So in a lot of places in the Old Testament, it doesn't say, and God will punish you. It says, you will be judged and punished, but doesn't necessarily say it's God who's going to be doing the judging and punishing. So I think it's a lot of misinterpretation, mistranslation that's just carried through. So people have assumed that it will be God who will judge and punish in every single aspect of every single thing. We know that if we go back to the earliest stories in Genesis, the first judging is obviously of the first man and woman, Adam and Eve. They are judged because they disobeyed an order. In the story of Noah, God says that he's judging the other people because they are bad, which is why he will send the flood. But not necessarily, but in other parts. So for example, the Exodus, there's a lot of it there that isn't saying God will be the one to judge and punish, but just that the person will be judged and punished if they do not follow these certain steps to be a good person, which we call those steps the 10 Commandments.
Yeah, I'm on board with that, Adam. And, I also think that we're going to toss to Sergio over here. He's got an arm raised. I also think that, we think that because we like to punish other people. So we just interpret the world as we see, we look at the outside world as we see our inner world, right? If I could punish all you people, I would. right? And so we just think that somebody else will do that to us as well, right? Sergio, what do you got?
Yeah, and I think that relates to the for example, when I'm reading the doctrine, and keeping in mind it was written in the 1800s, is we're gonna see a lot of mentions of the word good and evil, sometimes in the same paragraph. And I try to remember there's no evil. There's just the ignorance of good. So because if we maintain this idea of this duality of good and evil, then we're always gonna try to place someone on the evil side, and then it's gonna be us versus them. In reality, there's only us. There is not them. It's just us. They are just people in
Oh,
spirit.
Sergio, but it's so nice. But it's so nice to be able to blame other people.
It's convenient, isn't it? But so to me, like in its like most basic summary, God, came to Moses and told, "Don't do it." Jesus came and said, "Love one another." Kardec, in my way, says, "Study and better yourself," which goes in line with the saying we have in the gospel, love one another. This is the first commandment, and educate yourselves. This is the second. So to me, that's how it resonates.
Yeah. I also like to point out to people that there's a reason that sometimes the Old Testament is called the Old Testament, and that there is a New Testament, and that if we take everything for granted, we're going to be in trouble, because the Old Testament will tell us it's okay for us to stone people. It's okay for us to sell our daughters into slavery. It is okay for us to do a plethora of things, right, that perhaps today we might think differently on, right? So not to say that we should not pay attention to the Old Testament, but we should, use the common sense and the ability that we have been given by God to reason and make sense of things, to understand that there's not everything, that we shouldn't do everything, literally, right? And I think that's really great. And I think one of the coolest things I think of the New Testament is, if you look at it as a technology piece, right? Old Testament is version 1.0, right? The version 2.0 comes and gives the upgrade to the 1.0, right? So pay attention to the 2.0, right? And then we got Spiritism like 2.1, which is really explaining you what the 2.0 was about. But the point here is that Jesus comes at the end of his passage with us and he says, "A new commandment I give you, a new commandment I leave you. Love one another, not as you have loved each other, but as I have loved you." Right? So it first is like, don't do these things. Then is like, do to others what you would like to be done to yourself. And then is love others as Jesus loved us. That's like very different. That's like 3.0, right? Because even when we wish people well, it's not yet Jesus wishing people well. There's not that level of Christ consciousness, right? But that's a conversation for another time. But I wholeheartedly agree, Sergio. I think that you nailed it. This us versus them people, this like blaming stuff, it's really powerful tool, right? We feel really good sometimes because we put people down. And that's kind of a sad thing, right? We don't need to put people down to feel good about ourselves. And if that's our way of doing it, maybe we've got things to reconsider, right? But sometimes we do that without realizing. And that's what the challenging piece is. And that's why the whole like, inner transformation thing is key for us to be aware now. This punishment thing is hardcore because it gets stuck in our minds, right? Like these are trigger words. These are the words that people kind of read and they're like, "Oh, I'm gonna stop right here. Like I'm not down with it," right? So it's a great question, Val. It's a great question. Anything else that you guys want to add on that one over there, Val? Anything else you want to add on that one to wrap us up?
No, I think it's a good discussion. Yeah, I think it's really good. This point of the message came to Moses and then Jesus and then Spiritism is a very good point because I think as we evolve, we will be able, the humankind evolves, and as we evolve, we will be able to assimilate, to absorb the knowledge, yeah, the ideas better and better. So there are things that we don't know at the moment, and they are not revealed because we are not able to perceive and to conceive. So it's a good point. This.
Yeah,
Go for it, Adam.
I was going to say, and it's quite difficult for many people to adapt to a new idea, new philosophy, especially, you know, as we were talking about before, because they're stuck in their old ways of things. You know, if we look at any religion, absolutely any normal, structured, dogmatic religion that we have existing at the moment, all of them have positives and negatives in their books, in their literature. You know, why is it that we inherently, at the moment, culturally, reject Islam, Muslims? Why do many people have fear of Muslims? Which is it's a true thing. I'm not saying everyone does, but in general, one reason is because obviously Islam started because of a warrior tribe. And there's a lot of things in the Quran about defense, about brutal defense. But what many people don't realize is that the Quran has a bigger part about caring for each other, being there to help each other, to treat each other in the way that you would need to be treated if you were sick and injured. And so many people do focus more on the negative things, including the negative aspect of, I don't want to invest my time in studying something because ... And because Spiritism is a philosophy, who really wants to open their mind and think, okay, yes, it's a philosophy, it's a science, it's a doctrine, it's many things, it's many positive things. They want to see, oh, yeah, Brazilians, it's a religion, it's spirits. I'm not interested. They want to look more at the negative than the positive.
And the aspect that Serge pointed out is the good and evil. I think this is an important subject to discuss in this study, because we have this culture, the blame culture, like you Dan mentioned. Yeah, we have to blame people. So these are good points for discussion as well, because nobody is completely good, nobody is completely evil. So it's good to discuss this as well.
It's good for us to remind ourselves of that sometimes. We know these things, right? But sometimes they need to be exercised for us to recall, yes, there's a lot of negative attention toward Islam, because there's some followers of Islam, or you can argue that maybe they're not true followers of Islam. Some people who propose themselves to be followers have created some pain and damage in the modern world. But we also forget that we had the Holy Inquisition for centuries of years, right? So there's Christianity on the other side who also misbehaved. And if we look back today, maybe we wouldn't call those people Christians, right? So we got to have a little bit of a historical perspective and stop to find what I think you guys are saying is brilliant. But ultimately, like, as human beings, sometimes we want to find things to pick on, right? We want to find reasons to put other people who are different than us down so that we feel greater about ourselves. And that's challenging. I mean, that's not going to help either us or anybody else, right? And then we have the wonderful tool of reincarnation that comes and does two things. Helps us with its punishment piece, right? Or the self-punishment sometimes puts us in perspective that we did not appreciate in past lives, and we learn through example, right? Or like, but two, that if we truly embrace reincarnation, this idea of differences cannot be one that separates us, right? Because if today I am a white man or a brown man, tomorrow I might be a yellow woman, right? It makes no sense. Reincarnation is like the killer of all kinds of prejudices out there. But and I think it's a beautiful thing that we haven't got to. It's more of a module 3 thing. Like, let's talk about the philosophy of it all. But we forget that. We got to exercise that. So I love that you guys brought this one up, because we got to keep reminding ourselves that it's not just what's in front of us, right? Christians cannot be pointing fingers at Muslims. It just historically doesn't work well, right? And as a matter of fact, like, Christians by definition should not be pointing fingers, period, right? I don't recall, the Christ, pointing fingers at people and saying, no, right? Or you're not good and you suck, right? I struggle with that a little bit. So Christians are unfortunately giving Christ a bad name, right? That's one of the things that we try to overcome. But great point. We've got another 5 to 7 minutes. What else you guys got? Maria, you came back on camera. Do you want to talk about anything?
Sorry that I stopped the video. I was pick up in my
you don't have to apologize.
I was driving, then I came back. I was listening all the time, and then this thing is it's interesting, but I don't have an idea now.
Great. And Jair, we're all jealous of you. At least I am, because you're eating something delicious right about now.
Yeah. Sorry, I can't offer.
Nope.
Not yet through internet.
Virtually.
Otherwise, I would. It's good.
Anything else you guys want to?
I think not entirely related to the text or the homework assignment, but as I try to put into perspective, the timing of each revelation, or let's say, so we have Moses, and then we have Jesus, and then we have Spiritism as the promised consoler. God was not wrong about its timing. So that means that at the time Jesus came, we are supposed to be ready to at least receive the lesson of love one another, and by the time later on the promised consolation came in the form of the doctrine, we were supposed to be in a level morally and intellectually to assimilate the doctrine, as it was passed, and to hopefully in the near future we start applying. Now, when I think about the love one another as I know you love yourself, or do unto others what you like to be done unto you, we are still living perhaps in the age of the ego, where the cultivation of ego actually came down to like the personal and individual level, where everyone is able to cultivate your own, but we still don't feel loved as a creature of God that he created by his own will. And we tend to place all worthiness, our value on the hands of others, depending on how many followers we have, how many friends, how many likes, and all that stuff. So although sometimes we perhaps think that those are some bad times to be living in, we have witnessed the rise of ego. We may or may not have the opportunity to witness the downfall of ego, but it will come before we decide to assume the role of agents of the providence and be able to really love like Jesus did. So it will come. Just keep the faith and keep working on it.
Yep. And I would actually, venture say, I think that, the messages came at the right moment. I think that we were supposed to, I think we got it. I think that the problem is that we in this call didn't get it, and we're still hanging around, right? Other people got it and they graduated, but we still need a little bit of help, right? Sometimes I see spiritists talking like, oh, but Spiritism is the third revelation, and they're really proud of it. And I'm like, guys, there was a first revelation, we didn't get it, so we stuck around. Then we got the second revelation, we didn't get it, and now they got to send the third one. It's not necessarily, a reason for pride, and it's like, come on, children, let's keep going. Let's send somebody else because you're not getting it, right? So I think, but what you brought out was really great, Sergio, is that God continues to speak to us in different ways, and because we are different people who had different experiences, it makes sense to me that God would speak to us in different ways, because He would reach us in different ways. That which might resonate in my heart may not resonate in yours. And that's why I think it's beautiful that we are able to see so many different people calling others to God, so many different ways of doing, whether you be a Christian or a follower of Islam, or Buddhist, or Taoist, or whatever you want to call it, right? I just love that we have this diversity of voices that call us to the idea of spirituality. Because at the end of the day, the only thing that makes us grow is the different, is the uncomfortable, right? So we've got to stop seeing that which is different as a bad thing and recognize that is the only thing that makes us grow. Because if we're only exposed to the things we already know, there is nothing new going on. There's no synapses firing in our brain. We have to be exposed to different things, and that's not a bad thing. That's a great thing. We just don't have to get so defensive about it, right? Because I think that, I don't know if it was Sylvia or Val who started it, change is hard. Change is really hard. But change only happens when we are outside of our comfort zone, right? And so we ought to embrace that, know that God's in control, and when God's in control, change is going to be painful, but it's going to be okay, right? And that makes a whole different ballgame there. 1:29 Pacific time coming up. Any other last comments? Any other things before we adjourn?
I've got lots of I'd love to say, but I would be talking for hours and hours and hours about the historical aspect of things. So I'm not going to say anything else.
Great. So Adam, we should 2 weeks from now we should meet up somehow. I'm gonna be relative to you guys.
We are going to try to go to Bournemouth.
Huh?
We are going to do our best. We are going to try to go to Bournemouth to meet up with you.
Oh, fantastic. And let's talk offline, because I would love to, maybe we can have a chat. I don't know if you guys are familiar, on the side I do a podcast too called Spiritism Conversation. And maybe we should just kind of get together and chat about all these historical pieces and make it part of a podcast.
Yeah.
Yep.
Maybe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
We'll figure it out. All right, everyone. I want to thank you so much, and I want to make a plug. Like, if you haven't had a chance, remember that the text is also on the platform, on the website. It's always worth reading it. The end for me is beautiful. I love that. And as a reminder, there are forums, right? As Sergio brought it up in the beginning. If you want to chime in on any other questions, do that. If not, I posted some questions. The questions for our homework, so to speak, for this module are very simple. What's the one thing that kind of stood out to you, and what's one thing that you learned? And thank you so much for taking the time. It's really great to be able to talk with you. I would love to talk for hours and hours on this stuff. Clearly, I can't stop talking about it. But I'm really grateful that you were here, and I hope to see you again soon. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Daniel.
Bye.
Bye,
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.